So, welcome, Mr. Bruce.
Hello.
Welcome to Africa Cyber Defense Forum. And we welcome you. And as you give your keynote, it's a pleasure to have you with us. And we look forward to conversing. So the floor is all yours. Back to you, the audience.
Thank you so much. It's great to meet you.
Thank you.
I look forward to our conversation. I will make a few remarks here, and then maybe we can get into some discussion. So,
yes.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bruce McConnell, and it's an honor for me to be speaking to you today. Just a few words about me. I am currently serving as a distinguished fellow at the Observer Research Foundation America. ORF America was established in 2020 as an independent, nonpartisan public policy institute based in Washington, D.C. It's an overseas affiliate of the Observer Research Foundation, ORF, in India, which is India's premier non-governmental think tank. ORF America focuses on strategic and security affairs, technology policy, energy and sustainability, with a particular focus on relations between the developed and developing worlds and between India and the Americas. And as an affiliate of ORF in India, it shares a commitment to improving relations between the developed and developing worlds. For 30 years, ORF has encouraged voices from all quarters, geographies, and gender, both those that fall in and those that question the dominant narratives. It recognizes that as new powers reemerge onto the global stage, existing systems face challenges of agreeing on a new set of rules to control and regulate the new frontiers of space, the oceans, the internet, and the human mind. Before coming to ORF, I was the president and CEO of the East-West Institute, a 40-year-old think tank and do tank that focused on reducing and preventing international conflict, including in cyberspace. I came to EWI from the US Department of Homeland Security, where I was in charge of the cybersecurity of all US critical infrastructure in partnership with private sector owners and operators. So let me turn to my main topic for today, prospects for international cyberspace cooperation and its relevance to Africa. My views are informed in part from work we are doing with the Ministries of Foreign Affairs of South Africa and the Netherlands. And I will tell you more about that project later, but one of the key topics is about international developments in cyberspace security policy that are occurring in the, under the umbrella of the United Nations. The United Nations has been working on cybersecurity for over 20 years, primarily through a group of governmental experts, or GGE. Its focus is on reducing conflict in cyberspace. This group originally only involved a few countries, but it was expanded a few years ago to 25 nations. So all the major powers are, of course, involved, along with other countries. The last session of this GGE included 4 government representatives from the African continent, Kenya, Mauritius, South Africa, and Morocco. The GGE's, in its 20 years of work, has its principal accomplishment has been to develop some rules of the road for state conduct in cyberspace. So it's an attempt to recognize that nations are using cyberspace as a domain of conflict and to manage the cyber arms race and the unregulated use of cyber weapons. Of course, it is unfortunate that such a group is even needed. It would be far better for mankind if cyberspace was declared a zone of peace and nations agreed not to use it for attacking each other. If that was accomplished, there would still be cybercrime to deal with, but that is a smaller and more manageable challenge. No declaration of peace is forthcoming in cyberspace, however, so the next best thing is to try to put limits on what states can legally do to each other, just like we have rules for conventional warfare. For example, protecting hospitals. These rules are set out in international and bilateral treaties like the Geneva Convention, Chemical Weapons Convention, limitations and agreements on nuclear weapons, etc. Not everyone obeys all these rules, even in the conventional world, but without them, it would be much worse. Well, in cyberspace, we don't have any treaties. The GGE has only produced a set of non-binding norms of behavior. There's about a dozen of them, but the two most important ones are, number one, nations should not attack each other's critical infrastructure using cyber weapons. And number two, when one nation is being attacked from servers in another country, the country hosting those servers has a responsibility to turn off the malicious activity upon request of the first country. As I said, these are not binding rules. They are more like suggestions, but it's a start. So let's look at them. As far as not attacking critical infrastructure, we run right into the problem of attribution. As you know, it's not that hard to hide who you are in cyberspace, and attackers are good at that. So if you look at some of the big attacks in the US and elsewhere, like SolarWinds or NotPetya, some countries have accused others of being behind those attacks on critical infrastructure, and those were attacks on critical infrastructure. The accused countries have denied responsibility, and there's no objective international body to determine who the attacker was, so to determine attribution. So the attacked countries end up resorting to sanctions and other responses without international agreement on who's at fault and what's the right way of responding. If you look at the second norm about turning off servers in your country that are attacking somebody else, you may have noticed that in the recent Biden-Putin meeting, they talked about requests for takedowns that the two countries, US and Russia, have sent each other over the past few years. As you all know, just the place where a malicious server is located does not define who is behind the attack. Most cyber attacks globally come from servers based in the United States because that is where most servers are. And when I was at Homeland Security, we received and addressed requests from other countries asking us to stop malicious activity coming from US servers. I say we addressed them. We were not always able to shut it down, but we did make some attempts. These are good policies, and the group of governmental experts will keep working on them. There is also a second larger UN group, the Open-Ended Working Group, which is more inclusive. So in addition to the African countries I mentioned earlier, Cameroon, Nigeria, Senegal, and Zimbabwe, along with Algeria and Egypt, are members of the Open-Ended Working Group. The OEWG is only 3 years old, and it includes participation from the private sector and civil society, which is different from the first group. And so in general, it's a more representative group. It has endorsed the work of the group of governmental experts and underscored some important points in particular. So within the OEWG, there's an Africa group, and its expressed priorities are as follows. The Africa group has called for an end to the digital arms race, stressing that developing countries are the most vulnerable in this context. The group has also expressed support for a process leading to emergence of legally binding and rules-based order regulating the use of ICTs by states. It's advocated for a language that the use of ICTs to disrupt and damage or destroy critical infrastructure or critical information infrastructure violates international law and the UN Charter. So there's not complete agreement in the UN where the boundaries of law and the Charter are in that case. So this is a call for recognizing that. And finally, it has expressed concerns about the integrity of global supply chains and the stockpiling of vulnerabilities by cyber militaries. So those are a couple of the other kinds of issues that you are all aware of that we face in this space. A final point, which is a point that many smaller countries have made throughout these UN processes, is that it makes no sense to have two different groups running in parallel. There's a shortage of cyber capacity. There's a shortage of capacity in global cyber policy everywhere, but particularly in smaller and developing countries. And there's hope that some of the groups, those two groups, will be consolidated in the future. So that's the state of progress in these international deliberations. Earlier, I mentioned that we are working on a project in Southern Africa with the help of the Ministries of Foreign Affairs of South Africa and the Netherlands. We held an online meeting last October, and we're planning another online meeting this October, and then an in-person meeting, we hope, finally next year. I want to tell you about the first meeting and where this project is going. On October 27th, the Department of International Relations in South Africa and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the Netherlands hosted the Global Cyber Policy Dialogues South Africa meeting. This is part of a larger set of dialogues, which is also taking place in Southeast Asia and in South America and in Middle East, North Africa region. But this is the Southern Africa version of it. And the participants explored a bunch of different things, challenges and opportunities to building an inclusive, secure, safe, and resilient cyberspace around three pillars: sustainable development, peace and security, and governance. So the peace and security piece dealt to some extent with the problem of that I was just discussing earlier about the UN processes and rules of the road. Sustainable development is a conversation around the relationship between development in cyberspace and cyber capacity and security, and how those two things are interdependent. And the third piece, governance, deals with how countries manage the problem that governments have responsibilities for a lot of things that happen in cyberspace in order to create safe spaces for their citizens to work and live, but that the private sector has also a great deal of power, particularly large platform companies, and that trying to find the balance and a cooperative way of working through those things is a big problem of governance. There's a smaller problem of governance, which is that in many countries, the US is no exception, governments are not organized very well for who's in charge of cybersecurity issues. And so you have a lot of different ministries working on it, and sometimes the coordination is not very good. At the October 27th meeting, there were the three pillars I mentioned, with representatives from governments, business, civil society, and universities in Southern Africa, along with some from the Northern Hemisphere. We had about 70 people from 12 Southern African countries and 9 countries from outside the region at the dialogue. There were many of the speakers outlined similar concerns: skills gaps, lack of internet access, digital divide, missing infrastructure investment, and other challenges that are common and known to all of you. The need to improve the knowledge of users, mitigating potential threats to freedom of expression, privacy, and safety, and the need for international cooperation on many of these issues to tackle them. All these questions and benefits and threats in cyberspace, of course, fit into a larger context of global peace and sustainability, poverty, inequality, unemployment issues, and the interaction between the fourth industrial revolution and the demographic changes that are going on and the underlying concerns around development and equity. So there is, we did discuss that security, the relationship between security and privacy and development and the Sustainable Development Goals. And there was noted, for example, that the African Union Convention on Cybersecurity and Personal Data Protection, which was adopted in 2014, was highlighted as an important regional initiative there, and it's hopeful that the AUC will become increasingly involved in this issue in the months ahead. One point that was made that I found interesting was that, of course, for all of us, COVID has amplified the demand to bridge the digital divide everywhere, and particularly in this case, we were discussing Southern Africa, and the rapid digitalization efforts to keep economies afloat in urban areas, the increase of mobile phone ownership, and has strengthened voices demanding equality through social media. So there's a whole participation dimension to this, and the creation of opportunities for mobility and autonomy, especially for younger people and for women. But this means that there's a pressing need for skills training to allow the entire population to take advantage of the internet, and also, especially in rural areas, need for improved infrastructure and more internet bandwidth. And the problems of dealing with monopolistic practices by the companies investing in that infrastructure. And then a whole host of social issues were discussed, like cyberbullying, revenge porn, and those kinds of things. So there were, looking down more into the kind of needs on the ground, there was 3 points that were made. One is that governments should keep the internet on. Free speech should be protected, and digital citizenship should be built in a way that respects privacy, but governments that shut down the internet should be held to account. Second, there are needs for investments in digital skills and training in the grassroots that support local innovation and local autonomy. And finally, the data should be made available to people to understand how the internet is being used, and so that everyone can participate in shaping the future of it. There was also concern about information operations, cyber offense. We can talk about cyber offense in the Q&A if you want to. Mobilizing social media platforms by malicious actors and the weaponization of drones. Social media platforms have already been used to manipulate elections in South Africa, Madagascar, and Kenya, and hate groups are involved in those, which create things that happen in regular space, not just in cyberspace. So perhaps one of the most interesting commentators at the meeting was Mokhtar Yadali, who was the head of the Department of Information Society at the AUC. And he pointed out that digital transformation is a requirement for the survival of Africa, but it's also a geopolitical challenge. And so, looking at the industries of the future, artificial intelligence, development of algorithms, and big data, there is a concern that how will these tools be used, whether for morally good things or for malicious purposes. And Mokhtar suggested that the current geopolitical climate is sort of like a Cold War 2.0, in that the European Union is looking for new positions in its alliances with Africa and its fights with international tech companies, while the US and Russia are seeking to counterbalance the strategic threats with domination in the internet. And so this Cold War, this new Cold War, in his view, is based on using cyber warfare, but the factor that is unusual in this kind of warfare is large corporations who make have a huge impact on how much they control and are essentially unregulated. As you probably know, there's quite a bit of interest now in the antitrust area in the United States in taking on some of these big platforms. So something that I believe is overdue, but it's still got a long way to go. There was discussion of digital colonization and the need to avoid that by enhancing capacity and reducing knowledge gaps and promoting the cybersecurity strategies and computer cyber emergency response teams in each African country. So you can see that that first meeting was a very rich conversation. We expect to, as I said, hold another online meeting in October, and then we will, as I said, God willing, have a meeting in person in Pretoria next year. And those will be more widely attended. So we had 70 people at the first online meeting. We hope to have more people, and we'll definitely work with the organizers of this conference to see if we can find ways of including some of you and them in the conversation. That would be great. So to conclude, there is considerable progress and increasing capacity in cybersecurity in Africa, and yet there are many challenges ahead. We at the Observer Research Foundation America look forward to continuing to assist where possible and appropriate. And I'd be happy to answer any questions if we or get into discussion. Thank you very much for listening.
It's amazing, and congratulations for the good work you're doing at ORF America. An amazing work, and I have to thank you, Tim and Samir, for the good work as well. So we have a couple of questions, and it's good, the work you're doing in Africa. There's a couple of questions that are coming from the audience here. So, for example, I just show you some questions.
Yeah.
So there's a question that is coming here. Most attacks sponsored by nations usually seem to use third-party attackers and keeps away from anything that might be construed as an issue of national security and as an economic public health. This, along with the lack of international legal framework, means that small developing countries have very little response. How do we go around this? I'm sure you can read the question in the chat button.
Yeah, good, I see it. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think it's a problem. I mean, this is the concern, right? So you have these, the major cyber powers who are using third parties in some cases and avoid attribution, and the smaller countries get caught in the middle of it. So one of the areas that we discussed in the meeting in Southeast Asia is that a lot of times the large countries are using infrastructure in the smaller countries to host or to, at least for transit of tech and other kinds of malicious activities. And they're using multiple hops in order to avoid attribution. And so I think all we can do at this point is, the smaller countries need to stay united on this. And work together. The AUC is a good example of a regional group that is working on this, because I think, as is the case in so many things, right, the more powerful players don't always listen to the smaller countries. So I think, there's obviously people who want to change that dynamic, but we have to keep working on it. So I think it's very helpful to point this out, but I mean, even more advanced small countries like Singapore, they complain about the same problem, right? And so it's nobody wins in these cyber conflicts between the major powers.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. But there's another question I think maybe you had. I think is a question that is coming also very interesting. Is where does the power lie between freedom of speech, social media, and corporations? And I'm sure you might be conversant of an issue in Nigeria with Twitter. And of course, with Donald Trump himself being banned by Twitter. Now the question comes in: have social media, or rather, these social media companies, become more powerful, other corporates, than states themselves, or are they underpinning or undermining our democracy? What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I believe they have. I mean, I think it's, it's hard to, I can't see how you could not agree that some of these big countries, companies, their size in revenues is bigger than the economies of some countries, right? So that's just a simple metric, but they're also their control of the technology platforms and whatnot. And so you see this. And one of the problems in these big companies is they are, their business models are such that their services are free to use. So I live in San Francisco, and in Silicon Valley, there's an expression which says, hey, if the product is free, you are the product. And so I think that it is finally being noticed in America that this is a problem and that these companies need to be regulated. And since they're U.S. companies, I think it's possible that there may be broken up into smaller pieces, for example, and some other things regulated. I'm not sure how much good, however, that is going to do, for their foreign activities. I mean, maybe they'll be less powerful. Maybe there'll be more possibility for local competitors to arise because these companies will have less market power, and so there's more possibilities of local alternatives being developed. But I think we have a long way to go in this, and we are all seduced by the convenience of these platforms and their interconnectivity and all the friends we can make all around the world. And so everybody's trying to balance that in their own lives. But the imbalance is that the sophistication the engineers is much greater than the sophistication of regular users like us. So I think that's where we need the governments to step in on these things. And so you have governments in smaller countries, doing things, as I mentioned earlier, shutting down the internet in a matter of desperation, and that's not a good solution either. So we do have to get these companies under control.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting one, and it's good that the situation in Nigeria became very interesting, where we had two trains of thought: those who believe, but there are other people who say the fact that the president, or rather this president, has signed an account, whether it's to the state, then they're supposed to comply by terms and conditions of these providers of what we call Twitter or the rest. But now the other question was, who is much, is a state. Those who they are operating within a state, they need to be able to respect these democracies as well. And I think that's an interesting conversation. But
right. I mean, these governments are not always, friendly to the people. So in that way, these platforms can be democratizing, because they give people a platform to share, views that may not be the government's views.
Yeah. Now, as we wind up on the as well, there's also a question I want to ask as well. We have had a very interesting conversation, and the developing world, of course, from where you sit, there's a lot of capital flow, for example, that we are seeing, of course, to maybe help in improvement, whether in other healthcare or other sectors, right? For example, about the US program. There used to be a Goa project and all that. But the question that was coming of concern most so was in the cyberspace, where you're realizing that now, and if the summit between President Trump, President Biden, and the U.S. Russia summit, issue of cybersecurity was at the point of it, and I think the U.S. administration was very, very clear on the issue and what's happening with the colonial PowerPoint attack, with regards to the critical infrastructure. Now the question comes in with regards to the vulnerable countries, because what happens is that we are seeing cases where these attackers use the weak points in some of these developing countries to be as the jump servers to maybe attack, other states or the US, for example. The question then comes in: if we do not, protect or rather help in ensuring that Africa, for example, give an example, maybe Nigeria. I mean, Nigeria is very well known for, so-called Prince scam. Now, there's a gentleman I think was arrested by Department of Defense who was also prosecuted for running a very big, business email compromise in the, to a targeting American company. Now, our question to you is, what exactly? Because if we ignore these countries in Africa, what if the rogue states will end up coming in and using this vacuum to even cause more damage? What's your take on it?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, I think that the rogue states do this already. I mean, one of the things that happened while I was at Homeland Security was that you might remember there was an attack on Sony Corporation that was pretty clearly conducted by the North Koreans, right? And so we noticed that many of the attacks were coming from Chinese servers, right? So we contacted the Chinese, who were very unhappy that the North Koreans were using their servers for these attacks. So this happens even to large countries, as well as small ones. But I think, it's very tricky because, obviously if you can tell that it's malicious traffic, if you have the ability to do that, then you could, you should try to turn it off, right? Because it's not, just like if somebody's smuggling contraband through your country, right? You try to catch it. So, that you have to do, but the trouble is it's easier to identify, elephant tusks than it is malicious cyber activity and the capabilities of doing that. And then the other problem is that you inadvertently you shut down some servers that also were serving legitimate users. So it's not easy. But to my view, it's like I think governments have to get tougher on this and just say no. We're not going to allow that. And sometimes you may cut off some IP addresses, a block of IP addresses from a rogue state or something like that. It's like no, we're not doing that. And some businesses will complain. So that's a balancing act. But in America, I know we're running out of time, but in America, the companies are reluctant to take any of these actions because they're afraid their customers will say, wait, no, some of that stuff was important email. I didn't get it because you cut off those block of IP addresses. So I think the government has to work with the companies and perhaps provide them some reassurances on those things.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Bruce. And maybe your last word. What is your last word to the African policymakers?
Well, I think, as I say, stick together, work together, and present a strong consensus to the international community. That would be my goal, my advice to them.
Thank you so much, Bruce. And we look forward to working together with the ORF. As you say, there's some projects you're working in Africa. We're really, really more than grateful. And thanks to you for accepting our invitation.
The pleasure is all mine. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you, and have a wonderful day. Thank you so much, Bruce. Thank you. Have a good one. Bye-bye. Cheers. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We are heading to almost our last session, and I would like, before I invite Dr. Martin Koyabe, who is in Dr. Martin, if you are available on the stage, you can take your stage. Dr. Martin, if you are there with us.
Are we good? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. You can just take off after the slides. Just a minute. Okay. Welcome, Dr. Martin, and the floor is all yours.
I just want to load my slides. I remember we did this earlier, so.
Sure.
Should I go to the left? Or?
Yeah, go to presentation, then load. Or you want to share your screen?
Yes, I wanted to share my screen.
Okay, go to share screen. It's screen sharing.
Screen sharing, that's fine.
Yes.
So run in and out, that's what I want.
Okay.
So does it have to go with the app?
Yeah, you can use browser or screen, whichever.
I've chosen an app. Is that on the mobile, or is it the application, correct?
Yeah, I think it's still taking time to load.
So let me,
Maybe you can try share via the window, the browser, if it is taking long with
the browser, okay.
Yeah, just share with the browser. Still works.
All right. So
Or
let
you
me
can
check.
upload it on the deck.
I think it's going to, so let me see if I can share. So
Maybe you
I'm on the
can.
screen. So should I go back again?
Maybe you try and share screen.
Okay, let me see if we can.
Okay, there you go. No, this is not yours.
No, that's somebody else's.
Yeah, you wanna go back to share again? Okay.
Okay. So how do I cancel this? I can see the, have you installed our screen sharing app? I don't want that, I think.
Okay, maybe, okay, can you try to undo?
That's undo it from,
Maybe you try and click escape, maybe.
okay.
What do you say? Nothing.
So if I go to screen sharing,
Maybe you click there again and see what
oh,
you
so
get.
if I leave, it will take me out of the whole thing, correct? If I don't want to leave, so I'll stay on the page. Let me see. Screen sharing. So let me cancel that. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to share it on the? Is it a PowerPoint?
Yes, it's a PowerPoint. So I go to open browser.
Yeah, go to open through the browser. It will be much easier. You don't need to download it now.
Allow that. Okay.
Yes, there you go. Then choose the PowerPoint you want to share. Where is it? Is it among these ones opened? Is it down here?
Sorry, I'm trying to see something. I don't know what you can see.
I can see the screen, but can you see the PowerPoint itself?
Yes,
Because I can see you have many things open.
so
Yeah, is that the PowerPoint? Click
yes.
that one. Yes, bring it up.
I just share it completely.
Yeah, then you can play. Okay,
So,
there you go, sir.
are you able to see it?
Yes, we are now good to go. So you can now just, stage is all yours.
Okay. First of all, let me thank the organizers for this meeting. And I know there are quite a number of you who have waited for this session for a long time. And also thank the previous speakers who have come before me. And just to follow up on what Bruce has just been mentioning, I will look at three issues. First is the issue around capacity building and why do we have to take it, I believe, more seriously, not that than intended, but I think we need to have a more structure around capacity building. And then secondly, to not just do the talking, but also walk the path. So we'll also have a solution, not a solution, but an approach where the GFCE and the African Union are working together to try and address this issue of capacity building in Africa. My name, once again, is Martin Koyabe. As announced earlier, I am actually responsible for the coordination of this particular project across the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise, which is the GFCE based in the Netherlands, and the African Union organization. And we are working in partnership to be able to see this project through. So I'll come to the project shortly, but let me just recap on a couple of things. First of all, we've talked about the cyberspace as an issue. And when you look at cyberspace today, you'll all agree that there is an exponential growth of people who are accessing the internet. So if you look at the figures, we have passed, actually, it's roughly about 55% of the world population has access to the internet. So which means the cyberspace is growing exponentially. But when you focus specifically on Africa, you'll see that cyberspace is among the fastest growing in Africa, especially when you look at emerging economies. But then when you look on the other side, you find that it's also the least invested That's when you look at the investment that goes on in cyberspace issues, whether it's budgetary in terms of consideration, and when it competes for other sectors like health, transport, education, then you'll always find there's an issue in how much we allocate in terms of budget on cyber-related issues. But that, having said that, there are efforts, and I can acknowledge a number of speakers who have mentioned about several efforts that are going on cyber capacity building. There are efforts in terms of measuring maturity, there are efforts in terms of looking at countries where they are, and also making sure that there is partnership in developing cyber capacity. So therefore, there is no shortage when it comes to looking at cyberspace and ICTs in terms of the issues that have to be considered. But several questions come up when you consider the two. First of all, there is the issue around the growth, which is unprecedented, of cyberspace. And I've mentioned a few figures. You've got roughly about 4 billion people connected on the internet. It's estimated roughly about more than 50 billion devices will be connected. And that is a lot of information that needs to be guided, secured. We need to process it, we need to own it, and we need to make sure that there is some form of ownership and responsibility when you're dealing with this kind of information. You also have the issue about the growth, the increase of this, especially when you look at developing countries, where many of them are in Africa. It then calls for a rethink in terms of how do you deal with cyber capacity building. We need to rethink the way we've been doing things. There has to be a way of how you reduce duplicity. There has to be a way of how you increase productivity, ownership, and so forth in order to achieve the best out of cyber capacity building. Everyone is also exposed to the threats and risks that come with cyberspace. What that means is that you and I, your country and my country, are all in one. We face the same risks. I think the discussion that by Bruce and others just earlier, we've talked about the countries looking at their defense mechanisms, and then we're looking at interferences of countries by other states. And this is something that is becoming almost like a common phenomenon. So therefore, across the borders of our countries, we are still exposed to the same threats, just as much as that country that does not have a higher GDP than your country. Therefore, capacity building needs to be well coordinated. And I'll emphasize on this as we go along. There are various ways of how you can measure cyber postures of a country. I don't want to go into details, but there's a number of well-known standards that are out there that many countries have taken on, and they're using this to measure where they are when it comes to cyber positioning. It is advisable that countries look at these measures and use these metrics, not only to get the kind of like the chest thumping where we are in the world, but the point is to measure where you are nationally, where you are regionally, and where you are internationally. So therefore, these measures are equally important that many of the African countries, and indeed developing countries around the world, should look at these measures and take on some of the aspects of what metrics they provide. Now, it's always said that these metrics depend on who provides the metrics. The responsibility of the person filling the questionnaire, the responsibility of the person answering the questions. But in many cases, they are fairly accurate. I know we are waiting for the ITU Global Cybersecurity Index, which is coming up on the 29th of June. That will also measure a number of metrics. We know of others that have been used for different countries, like the CMM, and also we've got the National Cybersecurity Index, the others that have been done by various partners that do give a sense of measure of where the country is. So various countries, it is advisable and desirable that if for African countries, which this is the subject, should be able to take up these measurements and be able to assess their positions where they are. Opportunities are there and also challenges. And in fact, I want to look at the challenges more strictly on this particular part of the presentation, because this is where we really have a lot of issues when it comes to challenges that are facing African countries and other developing countries. First of all, it's the issue of the pace, the exponential pace of how cyberspace, space is growing. What that means is that many countries, especially when you look at the regulation, when you look at policies, they still lag behind and play catch up in order to regulate how fast these technologies are growing. Today, there are lessons that have been learned from different technologies. I think in the context of the continent, there are jurisdictions that have learned from the fast pace of technology, so therefore they've initiated activities such as think tanks and forums to discuss emerging technology and how it will affect the law and how it will affect the citizens. So therefore, there is a need to be able to prepare and to look forward of what is coming up and preparing the regulation policies that are progressive and not retrogressive. And one thing that we see today is that you find whenever technology moves quicker and you find where policies are not moving in that particular pace, then there's a lot of mismatch when it comes to harmonizing those ecosystems in those jurisdictions. So therefore, we require institutions and frameworks that are robust to deal with this. And what I mean by that is institutions that have been built on principle to deliver what they're supposed to deliver in order for us to be able to sustain capacity building in these countries. Legislations and the legal frameworks is important. The instruments of law needs to be in place so that it can be able to guide how you are able to build those areas of cybersecurity, create prosecutions, train people of how to collect evidence. So therefore, we need to prepare the capacity around how we are going to institute specific legal frameworks. We've just talked about data protection and privacy. We've talked about identity. We talked about other areas. But again, when you look at these issues, it also goes along with how first we are able to ratify some of the conventions. I think there was a mention about the Convention 108, which is by the Council of Europe. There are African conventions, which up to today have not been ratified by most of the countries. So therefore, to harmonize how countries can be able to interact with each other when it comes to cyber capacity becomes a problem when you don't have a harmonized framework across regions or across countries, as we all know it. So that is an important issue. Cost and affordability cannot be emphasized anymore. It's expensive. But also, countries can play a part by avoiding what we call duplicity, by avoiding wastage of resources. And that can only come about by coordinating who is funding what, who is the development partner, which country are they going to, so that you don't have a repeated characteristic that we've seen where projects are repeated by one partner, another partner comes and repeats the same project, and so forth. So the cost and affordability are critical. Cyber capacity building is expensive, but we can limit this when we look at both sides of supply and demand. When it comes to the area of building knowledge, understanding, and awareness, I can't emphasize anymore. And I think many of the speakers before me have touched on one or two areas where we've talked about the African continent, the issue of expertise, the polarity of diasporans who are well qualified not being part of that ecosystem, the issues around the standards of education, the issues around creating tertiary institutions that can be able to adopt, that can be able to take control and be able to grow the expertise that we need in these countries has been emphasized in one way or another. But the point here is that we need to build capacity in the understanding of what cyber capacity really means. We need to build the knowledge that can be able to provide the solutions, not just replicate what has already been provided elsewhere, but solutions that are tailored to the environment, that are understandable to those particular countries, and also to bring the awareness and the inclusivity, especially when we call on the gender parity, whether it's women and girls into cyber, whether it is areas where people are digitally marginalized because of their belief or their religion or where they live or their sect. Those are the issues that we need to really address, because that's what affects the understanding, the collective understanding. We've had examples of countries that have harmonized cyber capacity building in a very good way. The question is, they're harmonized. But how do you do that? You include everybody as a solution, not as a problem. So expertise in implementing and deploying cyber capacity building initiatives is critical. Private, public, and I've also added people partnership is critical. I know we always talk about private, public partnership, but people matter, because capacity building requires the ownership by the people so that they can be part of the solution. But if we leave the citizens as part of the solution, implementation of cyber capacity building programs becomes a problem. We've seen that with the issues about trust and identity. It's because you leave out the citizens as part of the solution, and therefore you end up with this problem. So the need for coordination and collaboration among partners who are either developing partners, donor agencies, implementing partners, the private sector that are coming to help, they require that coordination behind the scenes so that you can be able to provide a consistent, effective, well-focused assistance to the recipient countries. And that will push the needle of the capacity building initiatives in countries much, much further. We need to avoid duplicity of effort and also the wastage of resources, so that if one donor party or donor country has already come in and done one part of the project, there should be a continuation of that in a complementary manner if someone else wants to add another value into that area, but not having a repeated day in, day out way of how we waste resources going forward. And I think I just wanted to point out one point that was mentioned earlier about this recursiveness of collecting data whenever elections come in, especially in many of the African countries. So the issue of the political cycle has a lot of devastating effects in a lot of these development and capacity building efforts. Think about it this way. You've got 5 years of development. Those 5 years, one government tries to push the needle of capacity building to a certain level. Another government comes in, it pushes aside all the efforts that were done by the previous government and starts afresh. Just because there was something that was not favorable with the previous government. Even if the principles that were being applied in building that capacity, in ensuring that that capacity building is right, were correct. So therefore, you waste time in and time out of your capacity building levels, so that despite the amount of money that is being pumped in by donor agencies, despite the amount of money that is being pumped in by friendly partners, you never achieve the capacity that you require, irrespective of the amount of money that has been spent, because of the political cycle. Secondly, the political cycle affects the people who are supposed to be the carriers, the people who are supposed to take forward that capacity building element. So think about it this way. A government official sits in parliament for 5 years, is responsible for a certain portfolio. That government official is out after 5 years, another one comes in. But if there's no continuation, you'll never realize the capacity building we're talking about. And lastly, but not least, is the issue around ownership and the political will. We have to have ownership from bottom going up, not from top coming down. I think we need to make sure that the citizens, the people, the institutions, everybody takes ownership of capacity building. And it takes a while to build that discipline. And then we need the political will. I can assure you, audience, if we don't have political will in what we're discussing today, then nothing will happen. We'll come next year in a similar conference, and there will be nothing that will happen. So the political will is critical to make sure that we get these things going forward. So therefore, two key issues there is that there is a lot of interference when it comes to politics, and there's a lot of self-interest when it comes to ensuring that proper technology, ensuring that proper services, ensuring that proper priorities are put in place in order to build capacity in the way we know it today. So therefore, these are points that I think they are not exclusive, they're not holistic, but they give you the pointers that I just wanted to share with you of where we have an issue. So the question is, what is the solution? What do we do then? So let me talk about a project which we are trying to look at. And this is an initiative between the GFCE and the African Union, and funded by the Gates Foundation, to make sure that we can address this in a more succinct way. We've got several communities on both sides. So on this part of the African society, we've got the African Union that has developing agencies, we've got regional economic communities, we've got special agencies, the AU commissions, we've talked about them, and AU member states with their own citizens on one side. And on the other side, we have members and countries from the developing world. We've got donor agencies, we've got developing partners, private sector, civil society, regional organizations, and international organizations who are also part of the GFCE community. So what the project intends to do is to bring these two together, but in a way that is more effective, in a way that will provide the results that we need to see in building cyber capacity programs, in ensuring that there's an understanding in cyber capacity. So the key here is the project itself is looking at two things. Number one, we are looking at enhancing cyber capacity building knowledge, especially today, the understanding of cyber capacity and knowing what are the key building blocks of how you need to build capacity, what are the issues that you need to look at, whether it's policy, regulations, whether it's the aspects of how you organize yourselves in order to govern and be able to develop specific frameworks, whether it's the National Cybersecurity Strategy, whether it is the National Information Infrastructure Protection Strategy, whichever framework that you're building, how do you go around it? So there's a need to understand that. And then secondly, is to ensure that these countries are resilient when it comes to cyber capacity. So those two things are the main objectives of the project. The project has 3 deliverables, if I can move a little bit faster. Number one, we are looking at the cyber capacity building needs of countries. So therefore, we are doing an assessment to ensure that we have the correct needs of countries depending on their priorities. So many countries, with respect to with COVID, the pandemic, have probably changed their focus. Maybe they're concentrating more on deploying specific infrastructure. Maybe they're focusing more on making sure that children are educated. So they're building the digital infrastructure more than what they would have done elsewhere. So we need to understand what are these cyber capacity building needs and priorities of many of the member countries in Africa. The second and most important ones as well is the issue around sustainability, the sustainment. We need to build a community of experts such as yourselves and others who are interested in Africa and to develop cyber capacity building in Africa, to develop this community that is sustainable, a community that can reflect and be able to guide further the continent going forward with the issues of cyber capacity, where countries can tap into in terms of expertise, where countries can go to in terms of knowing what is it that they need to look at. And that community can be sustainable. So therefore, each country will be able to choose at least a number of people who come into this particular community. And we're not saying that if you're chosen and if you're part of this community, you are the only person who knows it. It's just that you have something that you can share, and that you have will be useful in terms of sustaining the project. And then thirdly is building of what we are calling the knowledge modules. These modules are mainly to enable the AU member states to better understand and address the cyber capacity building of the way we know it. So for example, if a country wants to develop a national cybersecurity strategy, there are various resources that they can look at, especially with the initiatives that are going on with the ITU, with the National Cybersecurity Strategy Guide, there are initiatives that have gone on with other particular initiatives to make sure that countries can be able to know how to develop these guides. But one fundamental question comes in is when they are on their own, how do they ensure that they can be able to sustain the understanding, to know exactly what to prioritize, but on a consistent basis that can be accessed online, offline, but with other people who are coming in through the ranks in each of these particular nations. So we are looking at something like a knowledge module where you can have this knowledge module that takes you through the understanding of what we are looking at. In terms of the first aspect, we've been doing a lot of work already. So just to give you a snippet, and I'll not go into details on this one, in the area of capacity building that we've been talking about, we've been looking at a number of areas. So we've taken roughly about 5 key focus areas, which you see on the left there. So those focus areas are looking specifically on areas that we believe are pertinent when it comes to cybersecurity issues in countries. This is also in line with the GFCE daily communique, where the GFCE committed to be able to build knowledge, to build emphasis on those particular areas. And we've been also talking to the community. So the community within the GFCE and the African community, we've been talking to each other to make sure that we can understand what is the status of cyber capacity building in Africa today. Where are countries when it comes to cyber capacity building? Which countries do we think require more attention, and in which areas of focus that I've just shown you on the left? Once we've got that, then we'll move on to the countries, do what we call a validation exercise, discuss with the countries specifically to look at what we have and what they have, whether they match, because many countries might have changed their priorities depending on what we've just mentioned before, issues to do with the pandemic or other priorities that come up. And then, of course, there is the issue of those prioritization being known. So it's important that a priority, what you call wish list, is available, because what that priority wish list does is that it enables a donor agency, it enables a partner, it enables an expert, it enables anybody else to be able to know where to put their effort, because that's what the priority is. So that's one part of this particular exercise in the project, which we're looking at, so that this priority list can always be updated, it can be available, and any other party can be able to access it as they say. So we have a metric of how we are measuring that priority list and how we are coming up with the data. So we pick one country, we look at the 5 areas that I mentioned. And of course, these are not only the 5 areas that are facing countries. Bruce has just talked about cyber diplomacy. This is a big, big area. We've talked about value chain threats, whereby people interfere with the supply of specific products or goods, as we've seen in the cyber attacks that followed. There is also issues of finance, which are also critical, because we never talk about finance, we talk about cybersecurity capacity building until when it's time to do the implementation. So then there are other areas that are more of a threat than what we've listed, which are also important to the countries that we're talking about. But again, looking at the countries and discussing with the countries, we are able to do that. There is the CCB assessment resources, which we've talked about. And now these are the ones that we've looked at. There are various other sources out there. I've listed a few. And then, of course, for each country, we've got what we call a traffic light sort of system that says whether they're developed, whether they're still progressing, or whether they have not actually started implementing specific areas of capacity building. And that can give each of the stakeholders an opportunity to be able to assist, to be able to participate, to be able to be effective in providing the capacity building that that many of the countries really need. And then, of course, secondly, as I said, is the issue of building the community. And very quickly here, the community is essentially looking at an African expert, cyber expert community that will be selected from AU member countries. And of course, we know some of the individuals who have been speaking here and some of the other people who are very active. They can be part of this particular community. And this community will be very useful in advising and bringing forward specific areas. So initially, we are looking at 3 representatives from each of the countries, one person who actually understands policy and regulation, another person who understands things to do with national infrastructure protection and CERTs, and then, of course, one other person from either the civil society or the private sector who understands issues of cyber capacity at the national level. 3 individuals from each country will be selected, of course, chosen through the channels that we are going through, because we are going through the African Union, through the membership, and then it will trickle down into the ministries, and then it will trickle down into the departments, and they will be able to give us these individuals. So therefore, countries have the right to tell us who these people are, and we have also the opportunity to be able to interact with them. The idea is to make sure that we have middle-level management who are keen to be able to take this forward, but also to be able to train other trainers when it comes to the understanding of this. But this is not only the number of people that we want. We know many countries might want more people to participate, and that can come in when we do the training and when we do the in-person sessions, which are planned for this particular exercise. So that community is important. It will not be the only community working on this issue. We already have communities that have already been formed. We know there's an African Fellowship Committee of experts, which is already existing. We are aware that there are other experts who have already joined other teams. Within the AU structure itself, we've got the African Union Cybersecurity Expert Group, which is also part of this, which will be part of this particular community, and other expert groups that have been formed at the GFC side. So therefore, it's all inclusive and bringing together a number of players who will be very useful in playing this. In fact, we've just had a meeting with Smart Africa, who are also on board, and they're very keen to be part of this particular community as well. The knowledge modules, just in brief, the knowledge modules, as I said, they will enable participants to understand better and be able to build capacity in the way we think about it. There are three things that I really want to leave you on what the knowledge modules will be looking at. Number one is to address the priorities that I talked about in the deliverable number one, which we talked about of the priorities of the countries. So if there is a priority that is identified, a knowledge module will try to address those priorities. The second part of the knowledge modules is to really have a module that will only communicate the understanding. I think the key really here is people to understand and take ownership of what cyber capacity building is all about. Why would you be doing it? Why should the country invest in it? How do you make sure that the politicians, how do you make sure that the decision makers understand the priorities of cyber capacity at the policy level? That is important. So that's why this exercise is really key to really get that narrative out. Because as they say, if you can get the mind, then the physical outlay is easier to move. So therefore, if you can't get the mind, the mindset, it is difficult to move these things sometimes physically. So therefore, we really have to go where it really matters. And that's why understanding is a critical area. And of course, knowledge transfer and so forth are also critical. There is the issue around the gap and the gender parity that I talked about. In this exercise, we are very keen to encourage women and girls to be part of this solution, to be more in this area, because that's an area that we know has a lot of deficiency when it comes to Africa in terms of how many of our gender leaders who are in this particular area. So that's something that I think this project really wants to see and to improve. There are three areas that we are looking at, as I said, three processes that will be very key. One is the community, which you see on the bottom left in blue. That is the communities that I've talked about. And then, of course, the priorities, which we need to make sure that we get those priorities right. And of course, the working groups that I've talked about from the GFC side. Knowledge modules, as I mentioned earlier, we are looking at the design and development. So therefore, there's the mapping exercise where we look at the needs. There's the design of the development and the approach, which we're also considering so that we have a better design that is easier to deploy, easier to understand, but also in various type of flavors that can be understood quite easily in a number of infrastructures that we are aware of, especially where there's less power or there's no communication. So there will be an offline and an online version, and then we can translate it into French and English and other lingos that are available within Africa. So that's very, very important. And then, of course, there is a feedback mechanism to make sure that the users can be able to send us feedback and let us know where we are. We are following a very strict code in terms of how these modules will be deployed. They have to be specific, they have to be measurable, they have to be achievable. That means within the time frame that is set, somebody can achieve something out of it, relevant and also timely. So those are the important ingredients when it comes to what these knowledge modules will be. But I can always explain further offline for those of you who might want more information or how to participate, how to build the knowledge modules. Feel free to contact me and I'll leave my contacts later. In summary, the two communities will benefit. When you look at the African community, there will be a better understanding of the issues of cyber capacity. It will also enable the countries to engage with the global multi-stakeholders within the GFCE so that you can be able to get the assistance where it's needed and effectively with the discipline that we envision, so that we don't have issues of duplicity, issues of things not working, issues of wastage of resources, issues of lack of ownership, because we want to bring those ethos into the development of cyber capacity building within Africa. And then, of course, there's the issue around the expert group. And we believe this is a sustainment measure because we need people who can be able to train other people and train other people who are coming through the ranks to understand what this is, so that we have an what we call an organic growth of cyber capacity building experts who can be able to advise governments, who can be able to evangelize the right things that we need to hear. And then, of course, on the other side of the GFC community, which of course comprises of other players that I showed you earlier, we can enable the community to better understand the needs of African countries, which is what has been debated for the last 2 days in our discussions. How do we make sure that we address those needs? How do we make sure that we get the right people in there? How do we make sure that governments do not go into waste? So this is where we are creating that opportunity. And then enhanced cooperation. We need to provide the opportunity for the GFC community to demonstrate knowledge, expertise, through involvement and enhancement of the knowledge modules. Now remember, the GFC community also comprises of African groups that are in there. So there are African countries which are members of the GFCE. So they too are part of this knowledge transfer. So it's not only just a North and South issue, it is really a global issue as we know it. And then other communities in other parts of the world, the Pacific, for example, the Caribbean, for example, the Latin America, for example, can pick this model and use this model as a way forward of how you build capacity, but in an inclusive, transparent, and of course, organic manner, as we shall see. And then, of course, create the opportunities for both the communities. So, to summarize, there is a call that we are putting out here for the African countries that are attending and partners who are attending this session. So the first thing is that we need to align activities in Africa, of course, for African countries that are participating with activities of the project. So therefore, if there are projects that are going on, whether it is within the AU, which we have discussed with them, especially through AUDA and NEPAD, which is the implementing agencies of the AU, they are on board and we are working with them to make sure that we can be able to implement this project across the countries. Because as you can imagine, it's a huge, huge project of magnitude measure, and therefore it requires a lot of effort. And we can only do this with partners such as the African Union and of course the agencies that are in there. We want to engage with AU member states to join the African Cyber Expert Group. I think that will be useful. They should be able to participate, be able to have people to participate. The coordination of the validation of the cyber capacity building priorities will be useful. So that's something that we're already embarking on to make sure that all the African countries can be part of this. We will be seeking input, of course, from AU member states on the kind of design, of course, through feedback mechanisms and in-person training that we shall have those sessions with different partners or different countries through the regional economic communities. We want to have these sessions that will give us feedback on the design implementation of how these modules are. And then, of course, jointly with AU member states, we will make sure that we coordinate in-person's knowledge modules. So these will be continuous. People will be able to access them online and be able to use them going forward. I know I've gone through a lot of stuff, but we've looked at the challenges, which I really wanted us to look at, that are facing many of the developing countries. I've taken you through some of the critical areas and emphasized what needs to happen in order for us to address those challenges. We've looked at the project itself in terms of the objectives. We've looked at the 3 deliverables. We've taken time into the deliverable 1, which actually looks specifically on what we are calling the needs assessment and analysis to come out with some needs for these countries. Deliverable 2, looking at the community, which is important as a sustainment measure. And then, of course, deliverable 3, which is the issue around building these knowledge modules that can be used as and when this project is complete, and also for future references for the generations that are coming up, who can improve, complement, and be able to add on other facets in that area. And then, of course, lastly, we've put a call that we want member states, especially those who are attending, representatives and others who are on this particular call and on this particular conference, to be able to take further these particular incentives as we all know it. So with those few remarks and with all the patience that you have, I really want to thank you for listening, but also thank the organizers for giving us this opportunity, especially for the GFCE and the African Union, to share the results and also the focus of this project going forward. Thank you very much, and back to you, Gilbert.
Thank you so much, Dr. Martin. And I think really the audience really enjoyed. I think there was a question that came in, but I realized you responded to it. So there's a gentleman who was asking, how do you ensure that there's a coordination to avoid duplication with those with some other agencies that are also working on capacity building? And I think you answered it by saying the call of actions that we need to collaborate. So there's a question that came. I thought there's no need to, because you have also touched on it, unless you want to say anything on that. But I think you
yes, we just to make sure that we can be able to respond. One of the issues that we've actually discussed that issue of collaboration, and we are going through the African Union, which has a lot of contacts and structure of how they communicate with member states. Member states also have regional economic communities who also have programs. They have a structure of how they deal with things that are pertinent issues at the regional level. So those two levels are the ones that we are really going to engage and engaging as we speak. And then, of course, the nations themselves, the members themselves, who can be able to prioritize that. So we understand many countries do have programs. Some of them are very tightly knitted in terms of objectives and in terms of timelines. So we'll go through those channels so that we avoid duplicity and, where possible, avoid burdening member states with a lot of duplicate information or requirements.
Thank you so much, Dr. Martin. I think that's well responded. We really appreciate and looking forward to further collaboration. Thank you for your time and for everything.
Thank you so much, and I wish you the best, but thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Graham, I'm sorry for small delay. Welcome. You're muted. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
So welcome to the last tail of the session. I want to maybe give you a chance to also say something, and before we proceed to our next step, which will be your stage. Prof, the floor is all yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. So, yeah, my name is Graham Hunter. I'm the Vice President at CompTIA, the Computing Technology Industry Association, which, we're delighted to be part of the Cyber Olympics and to be invited by the African Cyber Defence Forum to take part in this. And I just want to say a massive thank you to all the participants. I think the challenges that TriHackMe has set up, the competitions have been testing everybody's skills, and I hope everybody's learned something. I hope they've had an opportunity to test out new skills and those that perhaps they've picked up along the way. I just really wanted to say that, we're at this kind of inflection point in the cybersecurity industry globally. We're seeing that the demand for cybersecurity individuals is increasing, year on year. We're also seeing that the supply of those skills to meet that demand is not sufficient. So by taking part in this, you're really contributing to a worldwide skills gap. And, I think you should be very proud of yourselves to test and demonstrate the skills that you have against other participants across Africa. One thing I would say is that, and I'm going to announce the winners shortly, but what I'd encourage you all to do is use the prizes that are on offer that CompTIA are putting forward to benchmark your skills against the global certification holders, because whether you take that certification from CompTIA in Africa or any other continent, you're actually taking part in an exam that is common throughout the world. So you can really benchmark your skills here against those that are positioned anywhere in the world. So I encourage you to do that. We've got some prizes, some freebies to give away. But if you will allow me, I can start to announce the winners now, if that's the appropriate time.
Yes, Graham. Actually, yeah. Do you wanna share? Do you wanna share something, or do you wanna present? So, just hold on the line. Joining us is the chairman of the Advisory Board Africa Cyber Defense Forum. Just want to say thank you, so the two of you can make this announcement. So one second, he joins. Mr. Graham, just stay on the line. He's joining. So to the Advisory Board Chairman, Mr. William Baraza, kindly join us on the stage. So, Mr. Graham, I think you can just go ahead. The chairman will try to join. The floor is all yours. You are the one holding the secret. I don't know whether you want me to share the screen for you, or you have your screen to share.
No, you can share the screen if that's good.
Okay. I think Mr. William Baraza, the chair of the advisory board. Mr. William, I think you joined us as well. Mr. William, I can see you on the floor. Okay. So do you have something to share, or you want me to share something? That's the thing. Do you have?
If you can share, that would be good.
Okay. Okay, fine. Let me share. So let me share my screen. Mr. William Baraza is there. Okay. Okay. I don't know whether you can see my screen.
Yes.
I don't know whether we have the same same thing, I believe. Okay. Because now I can't see you. The floor is yours.
So yeah, as you can see in front of you here, we have the second runners-up, which in terms of challenges completed, there were 43 out of 58, and the team from Ivory Coast that came as second runners-up was unknown. So well done to those guys. We've got Khalil, Jesse, Abdul Basit, and Idris. So congratulations. The first runners-up, again from Ivory Coast, with the number of challenges completed, 48 out of 58, was Black Fire. And congratulations to team members Bisso, Intest, Rook, and Firewall. And then finally, the ACDF Cyber Olympics 2021 winners from Ghana, with 51 challenges out of 58 completed, was Team Wolf Hunters. So congratulations to Eric, Saeed, Stephen, and Arnold.
Congratulations to the teams.
Well done.
Thank you so much for the stop sharing screen. So yes, thank you so much, Graham. And Mr. William Baraza, the chair of advisory board, he had to join us from far. I think he was on the road, so he had to just try and park and join us. He's joining us from Nairobi. And I think he just wanted to say maybe a word as well to thank you for the support from CompTIA. Mr. William Baraza, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks so much, Gilbert. Thank you, Graham. I think this has been a very, very productive event, and thanks for the support you've given us, especially for the competition on Cyber Olympics. And we believe this will go a long way in enhancing the skills that is required in this part of the globe to enhance knowledge amongst the users of the internet, and those who secure the internet actually, so that we are all be able to safely use it. So thank you so much for that support, and we believe that this is just the beginning of a good partnership that will progress and sustain the times as we continue to share and collaborate issues around cyber security in Africa. And I think from what all the speeches that I've listened to from yesterday and today, what is coming out clearly is all of us globally, we are just as strong as the weakest person in that chain in the cyberspace. We could say that we want to have all these things in the north and have very secure networks in the north, but if the south is not secure, then the south can also be used to affect the north. So I believe this is a very good forum that has helped to really come out clearly with the needs that the south is requiring, and we believe as we continue exposing the policymakers, the academia, the industry on these issues, then the more collaborations will happen, and with these collaborations will make the internet services, the online activities that we get engaged in, very secure and safer for us to work in, play in, and do business. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, and Mr. William, the chair of the advisory board, and Mr. Graham as well. And I think we will engage further and see how we can also work on capacity building areas in the support of CompTIA. This is a conversation we can take further. But I also want to just also add on what the chairman of the advisory board of Africa Cyber Defense Forum has indicated. We want to thank you so much, Mr. Graham, and pass all our regards to the team and to the top management of CompTIA that we appreciate.
Well, it's a pleasure, and it's really been a collaborative, effort on all our parts. So I'm pleased that it's been a success. And CompTIA look forward to supporting you, well into the future. And when we can come and visit you, we will be there in person. So thanks again.
Thank you so much, Mr. Graham, and have a good one.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
So we've come to the end of this forum. The 2021 edition is finally done and dusted. Mr. William Baraza, The floor is all yours to close the forum.
Thank you, Gilbert. Thank you for all the wonderful work that has happened during these 2 days of the conference. I'd like to thank the entire secretariat that has been involved in arranging this forum for this year. I know it's not been very easy because of the pandemic situation that we have. You can see we've worked even longer hours because of the fact that we have to accommodate various time zones of various people around the globe, and it's meant that most of us have worked over 14 hours each day for these 2 days that will make this happen. So I really want to thank the secretariat that has been involved in setting up this conference and enabling us to have it. I also want to thank all the speakers, all our keynote speakers, for their contribution, for what they have done during these 2 days. Very informative, and I believe the attendees, the audience, has been able to take notes and take contacts, because it's important that we continue collaborating, continue working together even after this conference. This is the purpose of the conference. We want to bring to kind of bridge the digital divide that exists between countries to help all of us secure the online connectivity that we have using the internet. So I'd like to thank all the keynote speakers and the speakers who've been able to participate in this in this forum. I also want to thank our partners. Just talked about with the Graham of CompTIA, our partners, Fralti, who I represent. I thank Innovis, who Gilbert represents, and many others who I mentioned during my opening remarks, for creating time to help us, to support us, to be able to have this event happen the way it has happened. The most important people actually are the audience, the ones who've been able to come to attend the forum, to be able to participate in the knowledge sharing. Very good questions that have come out from the audience, especially fellow Africans who are based on the continent, the challenges that we are facing. And most of them, you can see they are around capacity building. And I believe with the contacts we've created, we'll be able to engage more after this to find solutions on how we can enhance capacity between what we can call the developed nations and the developing nations. I particularly liked the presentation from Chin, Singapore, and I think there are things that you take for granted, and some of these events, like just bringing out the government official at the ministerial level to engage on issues around cybersecurity, is very, very crucial, because some of these things are normally ignored and until something bad happens. And all the speakers here have alluded to the recent meeting between the head of state of Russia and the US, and one of the biggest items on the agenda was cybersecurity. Why? Because now cybersecurity is an issue that is not just affecting people who are online, or machines who are online, and maybe online between countries. It's affecting now critical infrastructure in the nations, and that because we are now getting into the levels of IoT, with the 5G coming in. Every critical infrastructure is now getting interconnected to other critical infrastructure. So you can find that a country can be brought down to its knees just through cybercrime. And I think we need to put this thing at the table of discussions of the policymakers, even politicians, not even the policymakers, even the political discussions must come in. And I think Brooks has just alluded to that when he spoke in his in his presentation. So that is very important, and this conversation must continue. We cannot stop. We believe it is very important that we continue discussing these issues and we continue assisting each other. I just mentioned that if Africa is weak, then Africa will be used to be the launch pad of the cyber crimes by the criminals. So we need to also strengthen African capacity on cyber security issues through obviously training, knowledge transfer, experience, exchange, and tools. Also to exchanging best practices about how to use the tools that we are using for securing the internet and online activities. And just to finalize is to say that obviously we will really like this conference to be physical, to be face to face, and we believe the next edition, which will be next year around the same time in June, we strongly believe that with the healthcare community has done about the vaccines availability and the whole world getting access to them, we believe by that time next year we will be able to easily travel from place to place, and we trust that we'll be able to host this conference in Nairobi next year, as we had planned the inaugural last year. So we really invite all of you, and we believe that we'll get the support from various partners that you have who have participated now and probably in the future to support us to hold this conference physically in Nairobi next year around the same time. So with that, I don't want to take all the time. I know my team is very exhausted and they need some time to relax and take stock of what has happened. I thank so much. I thank you very much.
Before you leave, Chair, there's Bharat. Bharat is on the line as well from CSIS.
I see Bharat, and thank you, Bharat, for coming on. Maybe you can say one or two.
I can say more than one or two words for sure. Firstly, I'd like to thank both William and Gilbert for setting up ACDF. This is a wonderful forum where people can get together, especially all the stakeholders from governments, industry, academia, non-profits. And I think it's been a great place to share ideas, look at best practices, and find people to collaborate with. And based on the representatives I've seen for the last 2 days, especially from the continent, I think your future is very bright. They're really smart young people. CSCIS, of course, is delighted to be associated with this event, and we hope there are many more in the future, especially, where we meet in person. That'd be really good. Some thoughts I had around maybe how to improve ACDF. Maybe instead of having just a yearly convention, maybe have quarterly or even monthly or more frequent meetings, but all culminating in one large event, maybe yearly. Because the advantage of that is that you keep the conversation going with the people, rather than have a break and then come back after a year. The other thing I thought about is maybe we should consider brokering some kind of collaborative discussion between government representatives, especially politicians and bureaucrats, right? Get them to talk, get them to come up with some findings, get them to agree on something, and get them to share this with the people on the forum, maybe. The other possibility, of course, is that maybe we should consider some kind of focused training for people in the government or top management or even engineers, maybe. Lastly, I think I'd like to talk about something which was brought up, I think, multiple times over these 2 days, which was, I think, a lack of sufficiently trained people. And I know several solutions have been proposed as well, and lots of work is happening here. But there's something else I keep thinking about when I think about this. And this is another such problem in the past, right, which the continent had. This was related to financial inclusion. And you didn't miraculously get people, nor did you miraculously get funds. You just innovated your way out of that problem. This was financial inclusion, using Safaricom initially, and then how this was taken across the continent. So maybe innovation is another way of looking at this. How, I'm not sure yet, but maybe as a start, we should encourage entrepreneurship and maybe define the specific problems and then let entrepreneurs go at it. Congrats to all the winners of the Cyber Olympics and to everybody who's listened patiently and interacted with the speakers of these 2 days. So until the next time, as Spock would say, live long and prosper.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, the chair, you close the session. Bharat, thank you. The chair, the final word. We leave.
Final word. I mean, thanks, Bharat. Gilbert, I think I've said what I could say, but final word basically is please let's continue the conversations after this. And as Bharat has mentioned, one of our key items that we plan to do as SCDF is also to have fellowship programs, which actually leads to this forum, the annual forum. And I think the Gilbert and team will, with the partnership that is building up around SCDF, will be able to execute this. Some of those fellows actually need to come from the audience that we have here. And once that program is set up, once it starts running, for sure you'll all be, I'm sure you have all your contacts will be in touch with you, and you'll be told how the fellowship program will run. So that will be some of the things that will lead into that. And I know Bharat has just mentioned something about partnership on training. We are already in some discussions with his organization, and I think we are following up on that. And some of those actions will probably be felt in a few weeks or months to come. So very important. And obviously, before that happens, we need to continue interacting. And then the other thing is we need just to prepare properly for the next physical meeting that we plan next year. So with that, I believe I can only say goodbye, guys. Thank you for coming. Thank you for supporting us. And hopefully, and God willing, we see you again next year at the same time. But we'll be sharing information in the meantime as we plan for the next conference. So thank you so much, and have a good morning for those who are the other side of the world. And for us, we can see it's already night time. So have a good night for those of us who are in the eastern part of Africa.
Thank you.
Thank you. Back to you, Gilbert.
I think the forum is closed. And thank you all, Chair, and thank you for the wonderful work. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.